In today's video, we have 5 more disturbing stranded at sea cases. These are real stories where people found themselves trapped in the vast ocean, facing hunger, thirst, and isolation. We'll dive into each case, sharing the harrowing details of their struggles and the desperate efforts to survive. Stay with us as we uncover these true tales of human endurance and despair. It was January 23, 2015, in Conway, South Carolina. Louis Jordan, a 37-year-old sailor, set off on a fishing trip on his 1950s-era single-masted sailboat Angel. He was eager to catch some big fish in the Gulf Stream. His family knew Louis as an inexperienced sailor, but admired his adventurous personality. However, Louis's trip turned into a harrowing tale of survival. A week after Louis left, his father, Frank Jordan, reported him missing. The U.S. Coast Guard launched a search on February 8th, but called it off after 10 days due to a lack of information. Louis was nowhere to be found. On the night of the disaster, a storm hit. Louis was asleep when his boat capsized. The storm's huge waves and strong winds snapped the mast and sent the boat tumbling. Inside, Louis was thrown around violently, breaking his shoulder. The boat righted itself, but Louis was left adrift in the vast Atlantic, injured and with limited resources. The rough weather damaged all of Louis's communication equipment, leaving him unable to call for help. Alone and injured, he faced a daunting challenge. As his shoulder began to heal, he tried to repair the boat, making a makeshift mast and rig. But strong currents made it difficult to make any significant progress. Louis had to ration his food and water carefully. He had some canned food, but it didn't last long. He used flour and oil to make 2 to 3 pancakes a day, which became his primary source of sustenance. When his supplies ran out, he turned to the ocean. Noticing that fish were attracted to the clothes he dragged behind the boat to clean, he used a net to catch them. Drinking water was another critical issue. Louis tried to collect rainwater, but waves often thwarted his efforts. When conditions were favorable, he managed to fill his 25-gallon water tank and a bucket, drinking about a pint a day. Throughout this ordeal, Louis found strength in his faith. He prayed and read the Bible, believing that divine power was sustaining him. Despite the harsh conditions, he remained hopeful. On April 2nd, after 66 days adrift, Louis was spotted by a German container ship, 200 miles off the coast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The ship's crew rescued him, and the U.S. Coast Guard airlifted him to safety. Louis was reunited with his family in Norfolk, Virginia, and taken to a hospital for treatment. Despite his ordeal, he was in surprisingly good condition, with only slight bruising on his shoulder and no severe sunburn or malnutrition. When interviewed, Coast Guard Petty Officer Kyle McCollum expressed amazement at Louis's resilience. He expected severe sunburn, blisters, and dehydration, but Louis's resourcefulness and faith had kept him alive. Some skeptics questioned Louis's story, noting his good condition after such a long period at sea. However, the Coast Guard found no reason to doubt his account. Louis explained that his shoulder had healed over time and that he had stayed in the cabin to avoid sunburn. His innovative fishing technique and rainwater collection had provided just enough sustenance to keep him going. Louis's father, Frank Jordan, had nearly lost hope. He recalled crying so much that he felt empty. The thought of losing his son was unbearable, but Louis's return was nothing short of miraculous. Louis's story is one of survival against all odds. His faith, resourcefulness, and sheer determination saw him through one of the most challenging experiences imaginable. It was January 27, 1971, when the Robertson family set sail from Falmouth, England, on their 43-foot wooden schooner Lucette. Dougal Robertson, a retired merchant Navy officer, his wife Lynn, and their children, Douglas, 17, Ann, 16, and twin boys Neil and Sandy, 9, were ready to travel around the world. This idea was inspired by British yachtsman Robin Knox Johnston's solo circumnavigation of the globe. Neil's question, "Daddy's a sailor, why don't we sail around the world?" sparked the idea. Dougal and Lynn sold their dairy farm in Meerbrook, Staffordshire, and used their life savings to buy Lucette. They planned to educate their children through experiences in different cultures around the world. The Robertsons started with high hopes but little practical preparation. Dougal believed in on-the-job training, so they hadn't even practiced sailing around the bay. Their journey began with excitement. Dougal, filled with enthusiasm, was at the wheel shouting "Yee-haw" as they set sail. The first months brought challenges and joy. They faced heavy weather, close encounters with other ships, and equipment breakages, but they also enjoyed fishing and meeting other travelers. They sailed from Falmouth to Lisbon, then to the Canary Islands, and across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. They visited various ports, made friends, and experienced new cultures. In Miami, they worked for 6 months to save money for the next leg of their journey. They inherited a life raft from a fellow traveler, an item that would later prove crucial. After a year and a half at sea in June 1972, the family was headed toward the Marquesas Islands from the Galapagos when disaster struck. They had picked up a hitchhiker, Robin Williams, a 22-year-old student in Panama. On June 15, 200 miles west of the Galapagos, the family's schooner was attacked by 3 killer whales. The impact was sudden and terrifying. Douglas, who was 17 at the time, recalled the moment vividly. There was a splintering noise of wood cracking, like a tree trunk being snapped in two. The hull was breached and water began to pour into the boat. Dougal's first words were, "We're going to have to abandon ship." The family quickly launched the inflatable life raft and their 9-foot fiberglass dinghy, Edna Mare. They grabbed a few essential items: Lynn's sewing box, some biscuits, oranges, lemons, onions, and the logbook. There was no time to gather maps, a compass, or other instruments. In minutes, Lucette sank, leaving them adrift in the vast Pacific Ocean. For the next 38 days, the Robertsons, along with Robin, fought for survival. Initially, they survived on their limited rations: biscuits, oranges, lemons, onions, and some glucose sweets. They had a few cans of water, but soon had to rely on rainwater, which they collected in any container they had. The rain was sporadic, and they often went days without fresh water. The inflatable raft proved problematic. It required constant attention to stay afloat. The bellows they used to keep it inflated broke early on, forcing Douglas to blow it up manually. After 16 days, the raft became unusable, and all 6 survivors had to crowd into the dinghy. Food was another major concern. They resorted to catching turtles, which became their main source of sustenance. They drank turtle blood when they had no water, dried the meat to ration it, and even rendered turtle fat to make oil, which they rubbed on their skin and drank to keep warm. They also managed to catch fish and a few dolphins, whose eyeballs and vertebrae provided some hydration. One of the most desperate measures they took was using enemas to stay hydrated. When their clothes rotted away, Lynn came up with the idea to use enemas to administer rainwater. Douglas made the enema tube from the rung of a ladder and attached a funnel. This method helped them survive the severe dehydration. On the 38th day, their ordeal ended. A Japanese fishing trawler, Tokamaru II, spotted their distress flare. Dougal, who had been sunk once before by the Japanese during World War II, saw this rescue as a moment of forgiveness and salvation. The trawler altered its course and pulled the Robertsons and Robin to safety. The family was incredibly weak and suffering from severe dehydration and malnutrition. They were offered bread, coffee, and orange juice by the crew of Tokamaru II. The captain remarked on their terrible smell, assuming they had scurvy. They bathed for the first time in weeks and began to regain their strength. The trawler took them to Panama, where they were examined by a doctor who initially doubted they could survive a flight home. Robin managed to fly back, but the Robertsons returned to England by ship. The family's incredible story made global headlines, capturing the imagination of people around the world. Dougal Robertson wrote a book about their experience, Survive the Savage Sea, which was later adapted into a film. The profits from the book allowed Dougal to buy another boat, but he never completed his dream voyage and eventually settled in the Mediterranean. Lynn returned to farming, and Douglas joined the Merchant Navy, sailing around the world 3 times. In 2008, the family donated their boat, Edna Mare, to the National Maritime Museum in Falmouth, Cornwall. Douglas also wrote his own book, The Last Voyage of the Lucette, to give credit to the entire family's efforts during their ordeal. It was February 1, 1709, on the isolated island of Massa Tierra in the South Pacific. Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor, stood on the beach, finally spotting the sails of a British ship after 4 years of solitude. This moment marked the end of an incredible survival story that would later inspire Daniel Defoe's novel, Robinson Crusoe. Selkirk's journey began in Lower Largo, Scotland. Born Alexander Selkirk, he was the 7th son of a shoemaker and a tanner. He ran into trouble with the church at 19, To avoid punishment, he fled Scotland and joined a privateering expedition to South America, changing his name to Selkirk. In 1703, Selkirk joined the crew of the English privateer William Dampier. Privateers were essentially government-sanctioned pirates, and Dampier's crew targeted Spanish and French ships in the South Pacific. Selkirk served on the Cinque Ports, a 16-gun ship commanded by Thomas Stradling. The expedition was dangerous. In 1704, the Cinque Ports fought a French vessel, the St. Joseph. Though the French ship escaped, the Cinque Ports was damaged, leading to rising tensions on board, especially between Selkirk and Stradling. In September 1704, the Cinque Ports anchored at Massa Tierra for repairs. Selkirk, believing the ship was no longer seaworthy, refused to reboard. He argued with Stradling, preferring to stay on the island rather than risk his life. However, his crewmates did not support him, and Stradling used him as an example, leaving him stranded with only basic supplies: a musket, a hatchet, a knife, a pot, a Bible, bedding, and some clothes. Alone, Selkirk quickly regretted his decision and pleaded to be taken back, but the ship sailed away. Initially, he hoped for a quick rescue by another English ship, but weeks turned into months and months into years. Selkirk's survival showed his resourcefulness. The island was full of wildlife introduced by previous sailors. Feral goats provided meat and milk, and wild turnips, dried fruit, and spices supplemented his diet. Rats were kept at bay by domesticated cats. Selkirk built 2 shelters from pepper trees, fashioned tools from old barrels, and made clothing from goat skins. His feet became tough enough that he no longer needed shoes. Despite his ingenuity, loneliness was a constant companion, relieved only by his deepening faith. He read the Bible daily, sang psalms, and prayed for deliverance. His isolation was twice interrupted by Spanish ships, but to avoid capture, he hid deep within the island. During one harrowing experience, he fell from a cliff while chasing a goat, but the goat cushioned his fall, and he returned to his shelter, bruised but alive. Finally, on February 2, 1709, a British ship led by Captain Woodes Rogers, with William Dampier aboard as pilot, spotted Selkirk's signal fire. Rogers was astonished by Selkirk's condition. Far from being broken, Selkirk was robust and articulate. Rogers dubbed him the governor of the island, and later wrote about his extraordinary survival. Selkirk rejoined Dampier's crew and within a year was appointed captain of one of their ships. He returned to England in 1711, becoming a local celebrity. Writer Richard Steele published his story, earning Selkirk some money. Despite his fame, Selkirk struggled to readjust to society. His time on the island had deepened his mistrust of people and heightened his temper. He was imprisoned for fighting and spent much of his money in pubs, recounting his adventures. In 1717, Selkirk left Scotland for London with a young milkmaid named Sophia Bruce. Their romance was short-lived, and by 1720, Selkirk married a widowed innkeeper in Plymouth. His restless spirit led him back to sea as a lieutenant in the Royal Navy. On December 13, 1721, he died of yellow fever off the coast of West Africa, ending the life of a man who had defied the odds time and again. Selkirk's legacy endures in his hometown of Lower Largo and on the island that witnessed his survival. A statue and plaque in Lower Largo commemorate his life, while Massa Tierra was renamed Robinson Crusoe Island. Another island in the Juan Fernandez archipelago was named Alejandro Selkirk Island, though Selkirk likely never set foot there. Selkirk's story is often linked to Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, though scholars debate the extent of the connection. While Selkirk's adventure provided a compelling narrative, Defoe's novel drew from various sources. Nonetheless, Selkirk is remembered as the real Robinson Crusoe, his tale of survival captivating audiences centuries later. It was September 1983 when Tammy Oldham Ashcraft and her fiancé, Richard Sharp, set sail from Tahiti's Papeete Harbor on the luxury yacht Hazana. Their destination was San Diego, and they were delivering the yacht for its owners. Tammy, 23, and Richard, 34, were experienced sailors, boasting over 50,000 miles of ocean sailing between them. They expected a routine delivery across the Pacific Ocean. However, their journey turned into a struggle for survival. The first 2 weeks were smooth sailing. The sea was calm, the skies clear, and the couple enjoyed their time on the ocean. They laughed, made plans, and embraced the tranquility. But on October 12, 1983, Hurricane Raymond, a Category 4 storm, struck without warning, bringing 140-knot winds and 40-foot waves. The storm quickly turned the serene ocean into chaos. Richard realized the danger and sent Tammy below deck while he managed the yacht. Moments later, Tammy heard Richard yell, "Oh my God!" and the yacht capsized. Tammy was thrown against the interior, suffering a severe head injury that left her unconscious for nearly 30 hours. When Tammy regained consciousness, she found herself alone. The yacht was in ruins, the mast was broken, sails shredded, and the cabin flooded. Desperate, she searched for Richard but only found his safety line hanging over the side. Richard had been swept overboard by the waves. Despite her grief and head wound, Tammy knew she had to act. The yacht was damaged but still afloat. She began by pumping water out of the cabin and creating a makeshift sail using a broken pole and heavy canvas. She found a sextant and her watch, crucial tools for navigation. Tammy faced numerous challenges. She rationed the limited food and water, surviving on canned food, peanut butter, and tinned fruit while conserving her water. Each day she used the sextant to measure the sun's angle and navigate toward Hawaii, the nearest land. The loneliness and grief were overwhelming. Tammy often spoke to Richard, feeling his presence guiding her. Determined to survive and honor Richard's memory, she fought on. At times, she considered ending her life but was urged to keep fighting by a voice she believed to be Richard's. Weeks passed with Tammy facing constant hardships. Twice she spotted ships and signaled for help, but they did not see her. Planes flew overhead but missed her distress signals. She was alone in the vast ocean, yet her will to survive kept her going. After 41 days adrift, Tammy spotted a 300-foot Japanese research ship. She was finally rescued and brought to safety, 1,500 miles from where she started. Tammy had survived an incredible ordeal, driven by determination and the memory of her lost love. Tammy arrived in Hilo Harbor in Hawaii, where she was safe at last. The ordeal left her with intense grief, trauma, severe dehydration, malnourishment, and a significant head wound. She suffered from nightmares, a fear of flying, and difficulty reading for years. To honor Richard, she tied her engagement ring to a rose and set it out to sea. Eventually, Tammy wrote about her experience, finding solace in sharing her story. Her memoir, Red Sky and Morning, A True Story of Love, Loss, and Survival at Sea, detailed her journey and was later adapted into the 2018 film Adrift. In the years after her rescue, Tammy rebuilt her life. She met the man she would marry and had 2 children. They settled on San Juan Island in Washington State. Despite her trauma, Tammy found peace at sea where she could reflect and heal. It was April 2023, and Tim Shattuck, a 51-year-old Australian sailor, was about to go on a daring journey across the Pacific Ocean. Alongside him was his loyal dog Bella. Their destination was French Polynesia, a 3,700-mile trip from La Paz, Mexico. Tim was an experienced sailor, and he felt prepared for the journey ahead. However, what awaited him was an ordeal that would test his survival skills to the limit. A month into the voyage, a fierce storm struck. The storm was sudden and violent, wreaking havoc on Tim's white catamaran. The vessel's electronics were wiped out, leaving Tim and Bella without any means of communication or navigation. The storm left them stranded in the vast expanse of the North Pacific Ocean. With the boat's electronics down, Tim and Bella were at the mercy of the ocean currents. They floated aimlessly, more than 2,000 miles from their starting point. Days turned into weeks, and survival became the primary focus. Tim had to rely on his resourcefulness and the supplies he had on board. He used his fishing gear to catch raw fish, which became their main source of food. For water, they collected rainwater whenever they could. Tim also took measures to protect himself from the harsh sun. He hid under the boat's canopy to avoid severe sunburn. Despite the relentless sun and the scarcity of food and water, Tim and Bella managed to stay alive. Tim's beard grew bushy, and he looked leaner with each passing day. He resembled a character from a survival movie, much like Tom Hanks in Castaway. 2 months passed in this manner. Tim's hope of rescue began to dwindle, but he never gave up. Then, in July 2023, a miracle happened. A helicopter accompanying a Mexican tuna trawler spotted Tim and Bella. It was a stroke of incredible luck, given the vastness of the ocean. The helicopter pilot alerted the crew of the Maria Delia, the tuna trawler, and they moved in for the rescue. When they found Tim, he was wearing 2 hats to shield himself from the sun. He had a dense beard, and a look of relief washed over his face. Bella, his faithful companion, was by his side, wagging her tail. The crew of the Maria Delia brought them on board and provided immediate medical attention. A doctor on the trawler examined Tim and found that he had normal vital signs. Despite the ordeal, he did not suffer from any major injuries or illnesses. Tim was conscious, chatty, and able to eat small meals. He was seen smiling with a cup of coffee in hand and a blood pressure monitor on his arm. "I have been through a very difficult ordeal at sea," Tim said. "I'm just needing rest and good food because I have been alone at sea a long time. Otherwise, I'm in very good health." The trawler transported Tim and Bella back to Mexico, where Tim received further medical care. Despite the harrowing experience, Tim remained remarkably positive. He expressed a deep respect for nature and the ocean, even though he admitted he would take a break from sailing for a while. After their return to Mexico, Tim made a difficult decision regarding Bella. He decided to part ways with her, entrusting her to a crew member of the Maria Delia. Tim wanted to ensure that Bella would be well cared for, and he believed she would be happy with her new family. Tim Shattuck's story is an incredible one, showing the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. Surviving over 2 months adrift in the Pacific Ocean required not just physical endurance, but also mental fortitude. Tim's ability to remain calm, resourceful, and hopeful played a crucial role in his survival.